I pressed it on a plastic unicorn.
You're listening to the Creative Faith and Friends podcast, episode number 18.
Oh, I got you. There's no reason to chasing payment on my own, 'cause you're here to stay every night and day. I'm delighted 'cause I got you. La 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 la.
Well, welcome to the Creative Faith and Friends podcast. My name is Melissa Olson with pinkpaperpeppermints.com, and I'm here today with my co-host Lauri. Hi, Lauri.
Hey, everybody.
And Jessica. Hi, Jess.
Hey, y'all.
And we are going to be talking about sewing on paper today, one of my all-time favorite things. And we are in the middle of a series on fabric. So we're really talking about sewing on paper and combining that with fabric. So we've got lots of tips and ideas for you. But first, we have some happy mail. And every week we share some mail from you, our listeners, either email or comments on the blog or reviews on iTunes. And Lauri has some happy mail to read today, huh, Lauri?
I do. Our happy mail is from, I don't know if it's Alyssa or Elisa, but she emailed us and she said, wanted to let you know I am now seeing scary/creepy faces all the time. Thanks for that. You're welcome. You're welcome. That's all I can tell you. It's right. I know. I'm so sorry.
No words for that.
Love the podcast. I always learn something new, find a product I must have, and get a good laugh. You girls are too funny. So thank you, Alyssa or Elisa. We think we're funny too. And we hope we come across as endearing.
Mostly Lauri thinks she's funny.
Yeah, I am funny.
That's true. You are funny. So I have a little surprise for Alyssa. I have decided to do something new. And one of the things that she mentioned in her email that I will keep just between the two of us, there's a reason that I'm doing this, but I am going to give her anything she would like from the shop. She can choose any product. I thought of that because of what she wrote in the email, but then I was thinking that would be fun to reward our listeners when they send us an email or leave us a comment. So from now on, if we use your comment or your email or your question on the podcast, you will get to choose anything from the Pink Paper Peppermints shop as a little thank you for that.
Yay.
Yeah. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. And if we've already used your comment and you're like, hey,
yeah,
then just email me and I'll work it out with you.
Oh, that's very generous, Melissa.
Well, I just don't want someone to be like, man, I just missed it by 2 episodes.
Yeah, I know.
But if you would like to participate by leaving us a comment or sending us an email, asking us a question or any of those things, we would love to have you do that. You can just leave us a comment at pinkpaperpeppermints.com/podcast and just find the latest episode or the episode that it pertains to and leave us a comment there. You can drop us an email and you can leave us a review on iTunes, which we really, really appreciate those reviews. They really help us. Apple sort of, the evil algorithm thing, they only share the podcast if they think people are listening to it, and the more comments we get, the more they think people are listening, and so the more they share it. So if you would do that, we would be so appreciative of that. So, okay, let's talk about sewing on paper. I know Lauri and I, this is one of our favorite things ever.
Yes, it is. I love it.
Now, Jess, you're a seamstress person, fabric person. So do you like sewing on paper as much as we do, or?
I do like sewing on paper. Not as much as fabric, but I do like doing it.
Why do you like fabric better? What's different about it? I don't just do fabric. So what do you like about it?
I think maybe because I can manipulate the fabric more. I can push it around. Yeah. And pull it and tug it and whatever I need to do with it.
Yeah.
Easier than I can the paper, because I get real frustrated if I do something with paper and it tears and I didn't want it to tear.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the one thing I do find frustrating about paper is it's very, I'm not sure what the word is, the technical word. It's very slippy. It's very difficult to...
It's not very forgiving.
It's not, but I'll use a glue stick or something just real lightly and then either sew around it or through it. It's fine. It's just for paper. It's fine. My needle is fine, Jessica.
Your machine.
It's fine.
You're giving me anxiety over here.
Yes, but remember, I don't do fabric unless it's along with paper.
I don't use glue very often because not because I care about it getting in the machine, which I'm sure I should, but I don't.
Me neither. Sorry, Jess.
But I don't like my needle to get gummed up.
No.
And then it won't go through the next piece of paper I put.
Right.
But I will tell you that I keep a little tiny bottle of Goo Gone.
Yes.
In my sewing cabinet, and then just clean my needle off whenever I need to. So this is not that big a deal to me.
I've done that too, yeah.
We're going to talk about that a little bit, about some of the fears that people have and the things that I think people are, it's stopping them from sewing on paper.
Yep.
Well, let's talk about sewing machines. Now, Jess can probably talk about this more than us, Lauri, but
yes.
Both the machines that I had, the first one, I picked the cheapest one they had at Walmart, and my husband got it for me for Christmas, and it was super cheap, and I just wanted it so bad to sew on paper, and I did not care what it was made out of. And honestly, I would still be using it now, except for my mom was like, "What kind of horrible thing is this?"
Oh, no.
She's like, Jess, she quilts and sews. And she saw that machine and she was like, "No, this is unacceptable."
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
So she bought me a much nicer one, but she probably wouldn't like it if she knew how I used it.
Probably not. Because machines make all the difference in the world.
Yeah. And the one that I have is a Brother, and it doesn't have a ton of stitches. I think it has 30 stitches or something. I don't know. I've never counted them. But
yeah, I've got a Brother also, and it's got a bunch of built-in stitches. Not a bunch, but maybe 50. I don't count it either, but I feel like it's more than 30 because it was on the box, and I don't remember what it said. And then I have a really old Singer, like that drops down into the table.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. It's not like the super, super, super old ones that you sometimes see, but it's old.
Like you don't use a pedal to make it go up and down, right?
There is a pedal. Yes, there is a pedal. What do you mean?
You don't have to pedal it like a bike. You don't have to push the pedal to make it go up and down.
Oh, gosh, no.
Those are the really old sewing machines.
My mom had one of those when I was a little girl. Yeah, an antique one.
I have an old sewing table that has the pedal on it, but I don't actually have a machine that would work with it.
Oh, that's crazy. No, no. You don't have to pedal it like a bike. Otherwise, I wouldn't get any sewing done.
We can't be adding exercise to sewing. That's ridiculous.
Right. We need to incorporate some exercise into our crafting. It would make my life a lot easier, and I wouldn't have to get up so early in the mornings.
Well, why don't you get one of those standing desks, and you can get on those little, don't they have a little stair stepper you can stand on at your standing desk?
I have a sit-down desk, but I usually stand when I craft. It's kind of fun.
I do like standing. It's easier. I don't know.
I agree. I agree. Yeah. My body moves better.
I don't think I want to mix cutting with scissors and trying to exercise at the same time.
It's probably a smart idea.
That would end badly, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
So what machine do you have, Jess?
I have an old Singer that I have reserved for paper, but I haven't pulled it out to use on that because I get impatient and just use my really good machine for it.
Oh.
My first machine was a Singer. I have had Brother. I liked a Brother, but my current machine is a Genome, and I love it.
Ooh.
Yeah, I tend to think those are real fancy.
They're not. It really is not any fancier than, now would I say it's nicer than the machines I've had in the past? Yes.
Why?
It's more reliable. I have had problems with every machine I've had well before I've had problems. I've never had a problem with this machine. Now, if I say that and I have a problem tonight, we're going to have issues. But so far, this machine has been a dream. With thread not getting tangled, with my undersides of stuff looking nice and neat. Like, this machine has just been so much nicer with keeping things in line and the perfect tension and everything.
Well, I feel like mine's fine, Melissa. Is yours fine?
Yeah.
Okay, just wondering.
The one that I have now my first one I had a lot of problems with.
You did?
Yeah, of thread getting tangled up and stuff. But the one that I have now, I don't even know. I think I've had it for 4 or 5 years, and it's never done anything weird that I know of. Maybe it did it and I didn't know it was weird.
Yeah, maybe so. Well, you know what I did buy you guys before I was very intimidated by sewing. And so I bought one of those little tiny ones. And I thought, well, this will be great for paper. Do not waste
Yeah.
your money. It is not
I
great for
tried that
paper.
too.
Oh my gosh, it was
Really?
terrible. Oh, it was ridiculous.
Yeah. Back in the old days when scrapbooking was the big thing, and I actually worked at a scrapbook store, and we carried those because people were
Oh,
all
you
excited
did?
about sewing on paper. So I bought one, and it was horrible. It was,
Yeah.
no one should ever give that to a child
No.
unless they want to make sure they never sew ever
Oh,
again.
yeah.
Well, that's
Agreed.
good to know because I've questioned if those would be easy to just keep
No.
on hand.
No.
Mm-mm. It
No,
was
they would
awful.
not. It's a waste of money.
Yeah, I don't think I got it to work even one time.
No,
Wow.
it was terrible.
And clearly I'm traumatized by it because that was like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Mine was
Well-
within the last 5 years. So
And that's why I ended up going with Janome because I was so tired of having to get my machine fixed or worked on. And I'm a DIY. Like if something breaks, I'm fixing to take the sucker apart and see if I can figure it out before
Yeah, I
I take
bet.
it to the
Sure.
before I take it to someone to have it fixed. But my
Yes.
brother had to be worked on several times even after, and I didn't do it to it. Like I didn't hurt it trying to fix it.
I thought you meant your brother.
I don't have a brother.
I know. For a split second, I was
My
like, your brother had to be worked
brother
on?
machine.
Thank you.
And I think they're a fantastic machine. I recommend them to a lot of people, but
Mhm.
my favorite is my Janome.
Nice.
So that's our advice for machines. I don't know. Take it for what it's
Right.
worth.
Exactly.
If you're looking for one, that's what we use.
Oh, I will say, let me say this real quick about that. One of the big issues I had is because with my Bible covers, I sew on the faux leather a lot.
Mhm.
Not all machines handle that well. And that was an
Oh.
issue I had when my machines would transition from that faux leather to cotton. They
Mhm.
didn't transition well. The Janome is
Oh,
like
gotcha.
sewing through butter and everything.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're sewing, if you want to get a machine just to sew on paper, I would recommend that you do what I did and just buy the
Yes.
cheapest one. In fact, maybe even look at thrift stores and garage sales
Mhm.
and get an old one and play around with it. Now, you have to keep in mind that if there's something wrong with it, you won't know because you don't know
Yeah.
what you're doing.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
So that could be an issue. But just for starting out, I would just say don't let the intimidation factor, I don't know what machine to get, just pick the cheapest one and try
Yep.
it.
Yeah, agreed.
So as far as needles go, I've heard a lot of different theories about needles, and I think we talked about this a little bit on the last show about fabric collage, that people say paper dulls your needle, and so you should change your needle out. And I think that that only really pertains to people like Jessica who are going to sew on
Yes.
paper, and then they need to sew a Bible cover with fabric. They don't want
Right.
a dull needle messing up their fabric.
Yes.
Like I said, I've never changed my needle, and I sew fabric stuff, but really only just like patchworky type journal covers
Right.
and stuff. Not really precise things like what Jess sews, and certainly not clothes or anything like
Right.
that. So that's why I don't, for me, it doesn't matter. But if you are somebody who's going to do both, then that is something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
And then thread, I like cotton quilting thread because it's strong and I really like the way it lays in my book because I leave the threads out, and the polyester is shiny and it kind of pokes everywhere, and I just don't like the way
It
lays.
breaks easier also, especially with paper.
I meant to look
Yes.
and see what I have because I really don't know. And after we talked about that last week, I did mean to check and see what I had. I don't have a clue.
More than likely, you have cotton.
You think so?
Yeah, unless it's really shiny, you have cotton.
Yeah.
I don't know. I do have a bunch of variegated colors that I got from Amazon, and I don't know what
They
they are.
may be polyester.
It might be polyester because I ordered a bunch of polyester variegated because it was pretty colors. And then when I got it, I did not like it at all
Yeah.
because of what I said before. So, and then one thing along the lines of thread that I wanted to mention was a lot of times I find vintage thread at estate sales and thrift stores and stuff. And I always buy it because I just like the way it looks and it's just cool.
Yes.
But it will break easier sometimes because it's really old and so it's falling apart.
Dry rots. Yes.
Yeah, dry rot. That's what I was looking for. And so just keep that in mind. I have used it on projects before, but I have noticed that it breaks a lot easier. And so that can be frustrating sometimes.
My thread is polyester.
Oh my.
Oh, no.
No. What do I do now?
You buy
Well,
cotton thread.
You got to buy some new
That's
thread.
right.
Guess I'm going to have to start paying attention to these things.
Yes, you are.
Speaking of that, I will have a link in the show notes, and I think it's in my link tree on Instagram too, where I get my variegated thread. But
Yes.
I love this lady, and she's got tons of selection, and she's really fast shipper, and I always
awesome.
buy from her. So I will link her in the show notes. And like I said, I think it's in my link tree and on my website, because that's one of the questions I get asked the most is about my thread.
That's why I bought this variegated thread, was because of you.
Oh,
And I just bought it from your link.
you did?
I did the right thing. Yeah.
Yay. Thank
Yes.
you.
Look here. I'm pretty sure she didn't have one when I bought it.
Yeah,
Jess.
yeah.
It's possible.
There was no link. I did not know her at all.
So when we talk about needles and them dulling over time with paper, yes, they will. It's like scissors. You can't use your fabric scissors to cut paper and think they're still going to be as sharp and easily used with your fabric the next time. At some point, you're going to pick them up and be like, this won't cut fabric anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Needles will do the same thing. Now, if you switch it out one time and you're sewing with a sewing needle and then you switch to paper and you go back to it, you're not going to notice a difference. But the biggest thing that I have found is just over time, you have to replace that needle. I don't replace it every time I switch between materials. I don't have a paper needle and a fabric needle like I do scissors. But I just notice I have to replace the needle more often than I would if I never sewed on paper.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But paper is going to be the same way with your thread that it is with scissors or needles. It's just a stiffer material, so it wears. You think about that thread going against the side of that paper when that needle goes in. So if it's not a really strong, heavy-duty thread like a cotton, it can pop it easier.
Yeah.
Good to know.
That's true.
Would it be a safe assumption then to say that if I am happy with my polyester sewing skills, that it would be even better with cotton?
Yes.
That I am a great sewer because I can sew with polyester?
I don't know if I'd go that far, but I would say that you would enjoy the cotton more.
Good to know. Darn,
I think so.
Going for the positive here.
I think you're probably an excellent seamstress, Lauri.
Of course I am.
We're going to let you make a skirt next.
Oh, no.
I have a great pattern.
Y'all, I can't even read a map. I definitely cannot read a pattern.
I can't read a map, and I can read a pattern.
Oh, no.
Well, speaking of reading things, one thing that I was going to say is the one thing that I think most people find hard when they first start. I know I did. And to be honest, it's the thing that I still don't enjoy about sewing, if there is one thing. And that is threading my machine and threading the bobbin.
Yep.
And threading the needle and all that stuff. I find it really frustrating. And seriously, I'll forget how to do it. If I don't sew every day, if it's been a week or so, I'm like, oh, now which way does the thread go?
Yeah.
So most creatives don't enjoy reading the manual, but you will find that will help you if you keep your manual tucked near your machine and you need a reminder.
No, Melissa, you can't do this to me. My husband listens to this podcast, and every time I have an issue with my sewing machine, he says, well, quite honestly, it's anytime I have an issue with anything. Well, did you read the manual? To which I always say, nope, no, I did not. Shoot, now I'm going to hear it.
You can get a good sermon out of that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
You need a manual with your sewing machine.
I
There are
have
just
one.
issues that arise that you need to be able to pull it out and say, okay, it's doing this. What do I do now?
But I just ask my husband, and he fixes it. He shows me how
Poor
to
Brett.
fix it.
And y'all wanted to talk
I
about
know.
Nathan having to bail me out of situations. Poor Brett.
I think y'all's husbands are a lot nicer than mine. Mine's like,
You're on your own.
yeah, he's like, am I supposed to know what to do about that?
Yeah, Nathan wouldn't come within 10 feet of my sewing machine and be like, I don't even know how to turn the sucker on. Like, what am I supposed to do with this?
Oh, yeah. Brett actually, he will sew if he needs to sew something, but he has a lot of useless information in his head that I often need, so it's not really all that useless. But I tell him all the time he's full of useless information.
That's hilarious.
So I suggest retaining your manual somewhere near your machine and don't be afraid to look at it for help. And I do want to say, don't let this overwhelm you, because I think the biggest thing with sewing on paper or even just sewing anything is just take that fear out of it. And we talked a little bit about this last week, that you just have to just start putting stuff in your machine and start trying, because that's the way most people learn, I think. I mean, some of us, I actually have a story on my blog about I got kicked out of my sewing class in 8th grade.
Really?
Yes, because I had kind of a bad attitude, but also because I just was overwhelmed with the teacher was very overly certain about everything and how it needed to be. And so she just put so much pressure on me, and then I didn't handle that well. So that's where I started from. I didn't even want to do anything crafty after that for a really long time in my life. And so don't think that you can't do it. Don't say, I don't sew. I get comments on my YouTube channel all the time where people are like, I wish you didn't sew everything so much because I don't sew.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, you can sew though.
Oh, yes.
It's not hard. It's really not.
It's really not.
Really not. And I'll tell you guys, I promise you, when I watched a couple YouTube videos, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years ago, and thought, oh my gosh, that's what I want to do. I want to sew on paper. And I was so intimidated and I didn't have any idea what to do. And it just took a couple of times of threading the needle, making a bobbin, or loading a bobbin. I don't even, what do you call it? Loading a bobbin? Jessica, what do you call it?
Sure.
Okay. It takes a couple times and then you got it. You totally know. So I promise it gets better. It's not so intimidating after you've done it a little bit.
Yeah.
And if you're intimidated about threading a needle, get a machine with a needle threader.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I would really like that because I don't enjoy threading my needle at all.
Yeah.
I will do anything at all costs to not have to rethread my needle.
Yes.
And whatever thread is in my machine, it's like, I'm sure that matches what I'm doing.
I've been doing a lot of basic black lately because it's already there and it's just easy to go.
That's why I like rainbow thread because it goes with everything.
That's right.
But okay, well, let's talk about some tips. My very number one tip that I'm going to tell people, and Jessica's probably not going to like this, is ignore the rules.
Oh, yeah.
And try everything. Just try everything. Now, if you have $1,000 machine or something,
don't try everything.
Pretend that I didn't say that.
Yeah. If you have $1,000 machine, you know what you're doing.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Think about it first. Don't take our word for it.
If you have like a cheapy machine, just try everything. I have tried sewing things and broke the needle right off because it was too thick. And it was no big deal. I just took it out and put a new one in there. And I was like, okay, I guess I can't sew 4 layers of chipboard.
That's right.
4 layers.
So I'm just saying, don't be stressed. Don't be like, oh, can I sew this? Can I do that? What kind of thread do I use? Just do it. Just stick some thread in there and stick some paper in there. Because the more you worry about it, the less fun you're going to have and the less experience you're going to. And the more you do it, the more you'll learn those things. So, and I see people a lot giving advice like, don't do this and don't do that. And you need to use this kind of paper and don't use that kind of paper. And I just always think, I'm glad I didn't read this article before I started.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I will put anything in my sewing machine at least once.
Yeah.
And that has resulted in some really fun techniques and also some weird things that came out weird and wonky. And sometimes something comes out and I don't like it at first and then later I like it. So try everything. That's my number one tip.
Absolutely.
And then, okay, so one thing I do is I use paper clips to hold my layers together. And obviously you don't want to use straight pins. I mean, you can use straight pins, but they're going to poke holes in your paper that you might not want.
Yeah.
So I use paper clips and those work really well.
They make these little, I don't even know what they're called, these little clippy things.
I think they're called sewing clips.
Sewing clips. Yeah, they're fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, you can use sewing clips. I just happen to have a lot of paper clips, so I just use those. If you don't want your stitches to show on the back of a page, you can just sew everything together and then glue it on or sew it to a backing card first. Usually I don't care about that. I like the stitches coming through, but sometimes you know that you want to do something on that back page that you don't want stitches to come through.
Yeah.
So you can just sew your whole stack of papers together on a backing and then glue it down to your page.
And that's also a good way to do it if you have decided you've messed up or you wish you had already stuck something together and then you can't sew through it. You can still sew on top and then just glue it down. Yep. Same idea.
Yes. Yeah. You can add something to it that's sewn together. Is that what you mean?
Yes. That wasn't the best explanation, but that's exactly what I mean.
Slippery packaging. I like to sew packaging. I just did one that I put in the newsletter about the last episode that we did. and I sewed some clear packaging in a die cut
Yes.
page.
Mhm.
And it's a little bit hard because it is really slippery. And so it's hard for the feet on your sewing machine to grab a hold of it. But I just hold it really tight and push it through, and that works.
Yeah. And it also helps if you don't want perfection, because I know that for me, and I'm pretty sure for Melissa, when we sew on paper, we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for
Yeah.
it to look pretty, and imperfection makes it, I think, much more pleasing to the eye.
Yeah, and everyone's different. Some people
Yeah.
might like really tidy stitches. I personally don't like that as much. I like it to be all wonky and crooked and stuff
Yeah.
sticking out everywhere. That was another thing that I read a lot when I read articles about sewing on paper. You have to use this kind of thread and make sure you use long stitches, because if you use short stitches, then they'll be too close together and perforate your
Tear
paper.
the-
I'm
yeah.
like, that's awesome when it does that.
Mhm.
I love it when it does that.
Right.
So, it's just a matter of what you like, though. I know some
For
people
sure.
might not like that. And that is one of the tips, is longer stitches will make fewer holes in your paper. So
Yes.
Yeah.
if you don't want the holes to be close together and you don't want your paper to maybe get perforated, then
Yeah.
you want to set your stitches to longer.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you can learn how to do that in your manual, whatever
Yep.
machine that you
That's
might
right.
have.
If you use your manual.
Yeah.
I recommend setting them to a 4 or higher if you're using
Okay.
paper and don't want it to tear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I will tell you now, I know we talked about this earlier, Jess, but really what I was talking about when I use a glue, it's if I'm maybe taking 2 solid pieces, but I want stitching more for decoration rather than, well, it's still holding it together, but I might put two solid things together with some glue in the center and then stitch around the edges. So I do try not to stitch through glue.
Yeah. And that was going to be one of my tips was, instead of glue, which can tear up your sewing machine, you
Mhm.
can
Yeah.
use, we talked about heat and bond.
Oh, yes.
You
Mhm.
can use heat and bond on paper also, and that
Mhm.
will save your
Yes.
machine if you're wanting to put different pieces of paper to collage and stitch on top. You can do heat and bond, or some people call it Stitch Witch.
I think you have to do the light though, is that right?
Yeah, you can. Well,
Okay.
you can do either.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
not going to go out and buy another one if I have the medium at my house. I'm not going to go buy the light, but either will work. It's going
Okay.
to fuse to your paper and fuse back to the other paper.
Gotcha.
And heat and bond is a good way to use fabric on your paper if you
Yeah.
don't want to sew or you don't
Mhm.
have a machine. We talked about that a little bit last week, but that's a good thing to use for no sewing.
Yeah.
One thing that I have read a lot, people say in articles, paper's less forgiving, which is true, than
Yeah.
fabric, but that once you get needle holes in your paper, they're there for good. They're there forever. You can't get rid of them. And I have not found that to be true. There have been times where I've gotten a needle hole. I've started to sew and then it didn't work out. So I had to pull the thread out. And now I've got these 3 or 4 needle holes. And if you flip your paper over and take a bone folder, you can
Ah.
usually smooth the paper down and tuck that paper back into those holes.
Yeah.
It's not going to look exactly like it did before you did that, but you can cover it up pretty well.
Yeah.
I've done that.
Mhm. Or cover it with ribbon or another piece
Oh,
of
yeah.
paper or some fabric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just slap some collage down on it.
That's right. We've got some Mississippi slap collage
Some
going.
That's
Mississippi
right.
slap, that's right. One other tip, if you've got, say you were using a piece of foam or something that was a little bit tackier or a little bit stickier to sew on, not necessarily sticky, but just not a real smooth, slippery subject
Yeah.
that you're sewing with, you can put on your sewing foot, if you're not using the free sewing foot, you can put magic tape, the matte finish gift wrap tape on the bottom of your foot, and your material will not get stuck under your foot. That won't snag it.
What?
Yeah.
It gives it some traction.
Yes.
Yeah, that is a great idea. I love that
Yes.
tip.
I use it on all of my faux leather. That works and allows it to just glide right under your sewing foot.
Wow.
Interesting.
Yep.
Now, I also read a tip about this, and I have not actually tried this, but it was saying that if you had something slippery, that you could put what they call tear-away stabilizer,
Yes, you can.
Yes, I've heard of that.
and that would help it go through your machine, and then
Yeah.
when you're done, you can just tear it away.
Mhm.
Yes, you can. You can also use parchment paper on top of
Oh,
something,
yeah.
and then it'll tear away.
That's a good idea.
If I'm sewing on vinyl or something, I'll just put parchment paper on top of it, and it'll glide right under that foot, and that tears super easy away from stitches.
I love that. Is a great idea.
Yeah, that's a great tip.
Okay, so practice. Basically,
Yes.
just get yourself a stack of scrap paper, or even better, like a stack of manila tags, and just practice, practice, practice. And just tell yourself, this is just practice. I'm going to throw this away when I'm done if I don't like it. But what you might find is that you love everything you make, because when I'm just testing stitches on a piece of paper or a tag, I end up always saving that and using it because I just like
Yes.
it. Just looks so cool to me, even if the paper tears and there's a big hole in it and the threads are coming out everywhere. I just think it looks really neat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Using chalk to sketch out a design. So maybe we were going to talk a little bit about free motion stitching. The three of us don't have a ton of experience with that, but that's basically where you use a special foot that allows the needle to just go every which way, backwards and forwards. And a lot of people use that to draw pictures and to write with. But if you don't have that, a couple of ways that you can do lettering is to use chalk and sketch it out and then follow that line, that chalk line. You're not going to get the smooth curves that you would with free motion stitching, because you're going to have to turn it, you're going to have to turn the paper at a little bit of an angle, but it's just a way to practice that. And then another thing that I've done is to print out a quote or a word in a really, really, really light gray, and then just follow that on the paper with my stitches. And that's a way to do some lettering too.
Friction pens also work wonderful for that, because you can draw on anything and then put your iron right on top. Don't leave it on, but just literally touch it with a hot iron and it goes away.
Oh, that's right. That's a good idea.
Yeah, I use those quite often. And so,
you know what? You want to hear a funny story about, those disappearing ink pens? These were in the fabric department I guess it's for marking a pattern.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And then it disappears, which the friction pen would work the same way. Well, when I first started learning how to do crafty things and learning how to sew and whatever, I bought one of those to do an embroidery pattern with, because I was like, this will be so cool when I'm done. You won't be able to see the lines. And I didn't have any embroidery transfer stuff. So I traced this really intricate, huge embroidery pattern.
Oh, no.
Yeah, you can see where this is going, right?
Sure can.
The first 3 days I got about 3 days into the pattern, and then it was gone. Because it was a disappearing ink pen. It disappeared after 3 days or whatever. And I was just like, first I was really upset, and then I just laughed. I was just laughing at myself, and I still have that piece of embroidery.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah. So don't use that kind of pen that disappears on its own.
yes.
Oh, no. But I will say, too, for free motion stitching, I've done it a couple of times, and it's really cool because you drop the feed dogs. Is that right? Feed dogs. And I honestly, we can put a link to her. The first time I saw it was on a YouTube video by Stitches by Julia, and she does a lot of free motion sewing, and I just thought that is the coolest thing I have ever seen. And it's because you can get like the really smooth curves. It just really looks interesting, and it adds a lot of texture. So I highly recommend trying it. I think it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it totally is. I really like it. I just don't have a ton of experience, so I don't have a lot of tips to offer.
Yeah, I don't either.
But it's really fun.
I do have one tip. When you are done free motion stitching and you put your regular foot back on, don't forget to put the feed dogs back up, because it took me a while to figure out why it wasn't going anywhere. I thought, that was not fun. Finally figured it out.
In case you don't know, the feed dogs are like the little teeth that are under where the needle is. And those are what hold on to your fabric or your paper and help push it through the machine.
Yeah.
And so you need those to be down when you're doing free motion stitching, because you don't want anything holding on to your fabric or paper. But if you're not doing free motion stitching, you really want those to be up. So.
Otherwise, it won't go anywhere.
Yeah. So, okay, let's talk about some ideas for sewing with paper. One tip that I would have, or an idea, is it's fun to sometimes sew with no thread in the machine. So especially on dark paper. So you just create like a dot to dot design almost with whatever you're trying to draw. You can trace something like we were talking about before. You can draw a heart. I'm saying draw, but you know what I mean with the machine. And then it just creates the holes in the paper. And it looks really neat just like that. But that's also a way, if you want to then hand stitch, now you've got all your holes pre-poked in there. and you can go in and hand stitch it.
It's also a great way if you like the look of tickets and you want to make them look perforated. You just stitch right in between them and it's got the perfect little perforation look.
Yeah. So another one is you can use coloring book pages and rubber stamps as patterns for machine sewing, but they're especially nice for hand sewing. If you don't have a machine and you want to do a little hand sewing, the more simple they are, the better. So if you just have a simple line drawing of a flower or a tree, just stamp that right on your fabric. You can use Stays On ink. I think they make fabric ink too. I usually just use whatever happens to be near me.
Yeah.
Stays On's not going anywhere.
Nope.
Yeah. So, and then you can embroider over that. If you don't have a machine, you can take a mouse pad and a push pin, thumbtack, and poke the holes into your paper. And that gives you a lot more control too as to how far the holes are apart. To pre-punch your holes to hand sew in paper, which makes it a little easier if the holes are pre-punched for you.
I found it to be almost impossible to do without pre-punching the holes on paper because there's no way to not tear something at some point, you know?
Yeah. And I always end up poking myself if I don't pre-punch the holes. So you can sew on photos. That looks really cool, sewing on old photos. And I will put a link in the show notes. There's an artist that does that. They do these embroidery designs around the person, and it looks so cool on vintage photos. So I've actually got several sets of vintage photos in the shop if you want to try it on something that you wouldn't be scared of. This artist actually uses the real vintage photo, but obviously printables are better because then if you mess it up, you just print another one.
Do they machine embroider or hand embroider?
Okay. Hand embroider. And it looks so cool. I don't know if it's a he or a she, but they do these geometric designs. So it's a person standing, let's say, in front of the San Francisco Bridge in 1902. And so then they take the thread and do these geometric designs over the bridge behind the person.
That is really cool.
Yeah, it looks so neat. So that is, especially with printables, there's not that fear of messing it up or ruining an antique vintage photo.
Right, yeah.
Another thing is to sew envelopes. I love sewing envelopes. So you can make an envelope out of anything in 3 seconds by just folding it together and sewing up the sides. Envelopes and pockets, one of my favorite things to do. Sewing on advertising, junk mail, old envelopes, things like that. It instantly turns old things or things that would look like trash. It instantly turns it into something beautiful. I
agree. It really adds so much texture and just visual interest that I think you're right. I think it makes it so beautiful.
Yeah. I have and I don't know if I can find it in order to put it in the show notes. If I can find it, I will put a picture of it in the show notes. But one of my Christmas journals, Starbucks, well, they don't really do it anymore, but they used to have really cool graphics at Christmas on their bags and their cups and everything. So I had a Starbucks bag. It was like a holly berry design, and I stitched with metallic thread around the design just on this piece of Starbucks bag, and it looked so cool. I mean, it literally looked like trash before I started, like something that you would just throw away. And then when I was done, it just looked so neat. So just look at everything a little differently. Like, could I sew this? How would it look if I sewed this? And you'll come up with some really good ideas.
That's really cool. I like that idea for the Starbucks bag.
Yeah. And then there are fabric pockets. There's several ways to do fabric pockets with sewing. And I've got a video, which I will link in the show notes, showing that one. And then ribbon flowers are fun to make. And I have a video of doing a super easy ribbon flower that you can do by hand with a needle and thread. And I will link that as well.
I don't think I've tried that, but here's a question for you with the pockets, fabric pockets. I always feel like it's hard to get it snug, not gaping. How do you make it snug against the paper so that it's not gaping open at the top? Do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah. If I want to make sure that it's really tight, I will just sew the one side and the bottom, and then I will put whatever card or tag that I want to be in it in the pocket so that I can make sure and pull the fabric tight around it. And then I will leave that tag in there and then sew that last side.
Gotcha. Okay.
That kind of makes it where it pulls really tight on the page.
Yes.
I also have accidentally sewn the tag or the fabric into the bucket.
Done that before.
So I will warn you that there is that risk of doing that. So you could take it out and just make a mark where the edge of it was. But that usually works for me.
Okay. The other thing that I like to do with sewing is shaker pockets or
Oh,
shaker
yeah.
anything. Shakers are very exciting and people love shakers. And who doesn't love a bunch of confetti running around, right? But I like to do it. I prefer actually to stitch maybe some tulle on top or something instead of
Mhm.
having to do the acetate, or I can stitch the acetate, but I like stitching better than glue.
Yeah, me
It's-
too. I love stitching shakers.
Yeah, it takes far less patience than glue.
Yeah.
Glue, you have
Yes.
to wait for it to dry, and I don't like that.
No. Who has time for glue to dry?
That's
Not
right.
me.
Mm-mm.
And then I guess the last tip is just scraps, saving all your little scraps of fabric and little scraps of ribbon and little scraps of paper, because that's another thing that looks so beautiful when you sew it all together down the edge of a tag or on the edge of a page. So things that you would normally just throw away, when you sew them together, they just look so pretty. So try that one too.
Yeah.
And then there is a site that has printable sewing practice sheets.
Oh.
It's got the stitches in zigzag form and lines and circles, and it's basically designed for you to sit down at your machine and practice. If you're nervous about getting the stitches straight, I guess, you practice on this sheet. And then I bet the sheet would look really cool when you were done too. So
Oh, I bet you're right. Mm-hmm.
I will link that in the show notes if you would like to download those printable practice sheets.
Several, it may have been last year, year before. I can't remember. My time gets really messed up, but I watched a video and then tried it. But the paper ruffles that you use a fork at your machine and you fold them back and forth.
A fork?
To create paper ruffles. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know this.
I will
Me
link a
either.
video. It is so much fun because you can use lots of paper scraps. And I did fabric and paper scraps together to make paper ruffles.
Ooh.
It's hard to stop once you start, just warning you. But the fork makes it very uniform and easy because it folds it the same length every time.
Oh.
We'll add the video in our show notes so that you can go look at the video. But it is a fun technique to try if you're wanting to try sewing on paper and create some extra embellishments and stuff that you can just have on hand.
Yeah, that reminds me, I'll take inch or maybe even skinnier strips of paper like you get off of scrapbook paper.
Yeah.
The part at the top that you tear off that still has a little bit of pattern or something. And you just start it in the machine and do a little fold with your fingers and then push it through and fold with your fingers. I imagine maybe it's something like that, Jess.
It's a lot like that. Yeah.
But way more uniform, which is really cool.
Yes.
I can't even picture how you would use a fork. I would end up sewing it.
Yeah, I can't either.
Not that it's neat. I can't explain it. It's really, you'll have to just look at the video.
Yeah. I'm super excited to see that and try it. That reminded me of another fun thing that's fun to sew in your machine and make ruffly things with is crepe paper. Have you ever done that?
Yes.
I don't know that I have.
Oh, it's fun.
And it ruffles it up. Yeah. And it looks really pretty. And remember, I talked about this last week, tearing your paper towels up into strips that you use to clean up your ink and paint. And I linked the video of a ruffle that I did, and I just did it with tape runner. But you can sew paper towels like that too. Like you would the crepe paper, where you just sew down the middle and you can gather it up and turn it into a ruffle. So. Yeah. Well, okay. I think that wraps up our sewing on paper episode. And I hope that you got some good ideas and some courage to try it if you haven't tried it before. If you have questions for us, just let us know in the comments. It'll be episode 18. So pinkpaperpeppermints.com/018. And you can leave us comments there and we'll be happy to help you with whatever we can. And our challenge for you this week is for you to create something sewing on paper. And you can do that by hand if you don't have a machine, or you can sew on paper with your machine. But we want to see what you come up with sewing on paper. It can be any of the ideas we mentioned or your own idea. Usually we have a word of the week, and we are discontinuing the word of the week because we came up with a different idea that we want to do, which we are going to tell you next week in next week's episode 19. So just look forward to that. As far as the challenge this week, you're just going to sew on paper, and make sure that you use the hashtag Creative Faith and Friends if you post your pictures on Instagram, because we are always looking for prize winners.
Yes.
So our winner for this week it's my turn to give the prize, and our winner is at the Pink Ape, and it's Marissa. And Marissa, we loved your page.
Yay.
It's really cool. She did a jelly print. So if you haven't seen that, go check out at the Pink Ape on Instagram.
Definitely.
And you win the prize this week. So
Yay!
DM me and I will get you a code for that, or I will DM you. We'll get connected with each other. And if you would like to win a prize, just use Creative Faith and Friends hashtag on Instagram and you could win one too. So are we ready for fun finds?
Sure.
Yes. So my fun find this week is something that I waited several months for, which is odd. I'm not patient, but I had to wait because it was out of stock everywhere. But it came in stock and it's still in stock. And it is called stamping. What is it called? Stamping foam? Is that
Yeah.
the technical name for it? Okay. Stamping foam by Simon Hurley. Create. And it is the neatest block of hard, mushy goodness because you heat it up for 15 to 20 seconds and then you can press it on any texture. Tree bark, yarn. I press it on a plastic unicorn and it's going to leave that impression in the stamping foam, and then you put your ink on your stamping foam and you stamp it.
Yes.
It's so cool. And then the best part is wipe your ink off with a baby wipe and then you heat it again and the image comes out magically.
And it's back to perfect.
It's awesome.
And you can do a new one.
Isn't that cool?
It's so cool. Lori and I both bought it and neither one of us have opened it yet.
Yes. However, I would like to point out, Jess, that I did recognize that when you texted us and told us about this item and that it was back in stock, you had already purchased yours because you didn't want the competition.
Okay, but let's get real. What did I know was going to happen when I did that?
We were all going to buy it.
2 more orders were going to go in.
That's right.
But the good news is I did let y'all know about it. And
that's right. You sure did.
At the time we are recording this, it's still in stock.
That's right.
Everybody's got a chance to get it.
It's been at least a couple of weeks, right?
Yeah. Ranger has rocked it this time, and they have it in stock.
And we will link that in the show notes. Yep. And just so you know, anytime you use the links in our show notes, that helps the show out. It helps us cover the costs of producing the podcast. So we super appreciate it when you use those links. Mm-hmm. And we will link that in the show notes if you want to get some foam and probably open it and use it before me and Lori.
That's right.
That's right. You have a good shot. Might as well give it a try.
And then message me and tell me how awesome it is because I love it.
Yeah. Yes. And then maybe peer pressure will cause us to actually open ours.
That's right.
Their new favorite product. Yeah.
Oh boy.
Okay. Mine goes with Jess's, and we didn't know this. We didn't plan this, but it will go with it really well. I just got these today, so I haven't actually used them yet, but I saw someone use them in a class that I took, and they are so cool. They are vintage lace doilies that are plastic, and you can gel print with them because they're basically like stencils of doilies. So you can gel print with them, but also they would make really cool impressions in the stamping foam.
Oh, yes.
So I'm so excited to try that. So maybe I actually will this weekend get my stamping foam out with my new doilies. But I will link these in the show notes. They're not super easy to find, but you can find them, and they are really, really cool. And I will post some pictures too, hopefully on the blog, of what I do with these because they're just amazing.
Yeah, I want to see what yours look like for sure.
Yeah.
So, Lori, what about you? What's your fun find?
So my fun find is thanks to my very dear friend, Jess. Jess has been using a traveler's notebook as her wallet for several years. And she told me about this, easily a few months ago. And I decided I wasn't going to invest in one and I was going to try to make one. And I did make one and I never finished it and I never used it. So I finally decided to purchase a Chic Sparrow traveler's notebook cover in a Passport Plus size. I'm supposed to get it on Saturday. I haven't seen it yet. It is going to be amazing. And I'm going to have my wallet in my traveler's notebook and I'm super duper excited about it.
And you're going to be so happy because I can't even imagine using any kind of other wallet.
I know. I'm very excited about it. So I'm looking forward to putting it together. I'm looking forward to getting the leather. It's this beautiful, I think the color is Woodhouse, and it's kind of a bright navy kind of. It's really pretty. I ordered one of those up and it shipped the next day. They have amazing customer service. If you haven't bought from them before, I emailed Chic Sparrow asking a question about something, and she sent me a video, and she said, "Hey, Lauri, thanks so much for your question." And she answered my question. Isn't that the coolest thing?
That's so
I'm
cool.
just so, I'm so impressed by that.
I was really impressed. So they are amazing, and I've heard nothing but great things. So that's my fun find.
And with it being real leather, and it is, it's forever.
Yes.
Even if you spill coffee in your purse. True story.
I was going to say, that feels like a real story to me.
It does. Yeah. Because whenever should you have coffee in your purse?
Okay. Who else put coffee in their purse before our trip was over?
No, that was water. But I did.
You put a drink in your purse. I'm just saying.
Did. And it was not a bottle, like
when
a bottle
your
of water.
Hands
It was a cup.
full,
Yes.
you have to get creative sometimes. And I might have sat a cup of coffee in my purse. And it might have spilled out onto everything in my purse.
But your leather traveler's notebook is not ruined.
It's not ruined. It has a nice little coffee stain. But I mean, how many times do we put coffee rings on things because we think they look cool?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, now I need a Chic Sparrow wallet because I feel a little bit left out.
Yes,
so
they're wonderful.
Okay, well, before we go, we want to tell you where you can find us online. Lauri, where can we find you?
You can find me on Instagram and YouTube at Measure Once, Cut Twice, with periods in between each of the words.
And Jess, where can we find you?
You can find me on Instagram and YouTube at Just Give Me Jesus, or on Etsy at Choose Joy in Jesus.
And you can find me at pinkpaperpeppermints.com. And I'm at pinkpaperpeppermints.com on all my social media, and I would love to meet up with you there. And thank you so much for joining us. We have more fabric goodness to talk with you next week, so we hope you'll join us then. And we will see you then. Bye.
Bye.
So have you ever sewn on paper before, and do you think you'll try it this week for our challenge? Do you have any tips for us? If you do, leave us a comment on my blog at pinkpaperpeppermints.com/podcast and let us know. You can find links to everything we talked about in the show notes at pinkpaperpeppermints.com/018. And as always, if you have a moment to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, we would be so appreciative. It really helps the show to get found, and it helps us to connect with more creative friends. I'm Melissa Olson, and I hope you have a week filled with peace and grace, and we will see you next time on Creative Faith and Friends.